In this video, we're going to talk about how to identify key features of quadratic functions in vertex form. So in Algebra 2, we're actually going to expand our knowledge of parabolas to learn about vertical and horizontal parabolas. So vertical parabolas, I know that you've seen in Algebra 1, and now we're actually going to also learn about horizontal parabolas. So let's get started with some vertical parabolas. Here's vertex form of a vertical parabola. It's y equals a times x minus h squared plus k. And I know that you've seen this equation before in Algebra 1. Remember that this equation tells us the key characteristics of the quadratic function. So the parabola will open up if a is greater than 0, and it will open down if a is less than 0. The vertex will be a minimum if a is greater than 0 because the vertex will be the lowest point on the graph. The vertex will be a maximum if a is less than 0 because the vertex will be the highest point on the graph. The location of the vertex will be hk, and you have to be careful here because h will have the opposite sign of what's in front of it in the equation. And the reason for that is because in this equation, h is actually being subtracted. So that's going to cause this equation to have the opposite sign of what's actually the value of h. The equation of the axis of symmetry is x equals h, and to determine the y-intercept, we're going to set x equal to 0 and solve for y. So once again, I just want to remind you to be careful when determining the x-coordinate of the vertex. Since vertex form involves x minus h squared, we have to switch the sign when determining the value of h. So the vertex of y equals x minus 1 squared plus 2 will be 1, 2. Okay, so notice there's a minus in front of 1, but when we write h, it's just going to be positive 1. The vertex of y equals x plus 3 squared minus 2 will be negative 3, negative 2, because there's a plus in front of 3, but when we write down the value of h, it's going to have the opposite sign. So here's a summary of the key features of a vertical parabola in vertex form. From the equation, we can identify the direction of opening, the vertex, if it's a maximum or a minimum, and the axis of symmetry. So when you're working on these problems, you always want to first take a minute to identify the values of a, h, and k from the equation. I think it's really helpful to do this because it helps you keep organized when you're trying to put together all of this information. Then we'll use this table to identify the key features, and finally we can verify our answers using Desmos. So let's go ahead and work on this problem. Let's identify the key characteristics of the parabola represented by y equals negative 3 times x minus 5 squared minus 2. So first, let's identify the values of a, h, and k. So a is going to be negative 3, h will be 5, because remember it's the opposite sign of what's in the equation, and then k will be negative 2. So the direction of opening, well, since a is less than 0, it's actually going to open down. The vertex is going to be at hk, so that's going to be 5, negative 2. Since this parabola opens down like this, the vertex is going to be actually a maximum, and then the axis of symmetry will pass through the x-coordinate of the vertex. So the axis of symmetry will be x equals 5. So remember, we can use Desmos to help us verify this. So we have negative 3 times x minus 5 squared, and then minus 2. So you can see from this graph that it does open down. If we click on this point, it tells us the vertex, which is at 5, negative 2. And if we drew in that line, x equals 5, we know that that would be the axis of symmetry. So now let's identify the key characteristics of this parabola. So notice here that a is equal to 1/2. H is going to have the opposite sign, so it's going to be minus 6, and then k is going to be 5. So since a is positive, this direction of opening is going to be up. The vertex is going to be at hk, so we have negative 6, 5. Since it opens up like this, the vertex is actually going to be a minimum. The axis of symmetry is going to go through the vertex, so that's going to be x equals negative 6. Let's verify this in Desmos. So I'm going to go ahead and type in this equation. So I have 1/2, and then I have x plus 6 squared, and then plus 5. Okay, so if I go over here, you can see my parabola. It does open up like we said. The vertex is at negative 6, 5, and that vertex you can see is a minimum. If I draw in the axis of symmetry, x equals negative 6, you see that it does cut my parabola in half. So now you can go ahead and pause the video and try doing this example on your own. So here the values of a are 1/6, h is 3, and k is negative 10. Since a is positive, it opens up. The vertex is at hk, so that's 3, negative 10. The vertex will be a minimum since A is positive and the axis of symmetry is x equals 3. If we try verifying in Desmos, we can type in the equation. So we have 1/6 times x minus 3 squared and then minus 10. And you can see here that this parabola does open up like we said. The vertex is at 3, -10. The vertex is a minimum. And if I type in x equals 3, you can see that it does cut my parabola in half. So now let's learn about vertex form of a horizontal parabola. So a horizontal parabola is like a sideways parabola. Okay, so that vertex form is going to be x equals a times y minus k squared plus h. So notice here that the y is going to be the square term. So that's what makes it a horizontal parabola. So based on this equation, we can still identify the key characteristics. So what's going to happen here is based on A, it's going to decide whether the parabola opens right or opens left. Is if A is positive, if A is bigger than 0, it's going to open right. If A is negative, if A is less than 0, it's going to open left. The vertex is going to still be at hk, but be careful because h is now going to be the value that's outside our parentheses and k is going to be the value that's with y. Once again, we have to be careful because that k is being subtracted, so it's going to have the opposite sign of what's in front of it in the equation. The equation of the axis of symmetry will now be y equals k, right? Because if you think about it, if you have a sideways parabola, it wouldn't make sense to have x equals as the axis of symmetry, right? Because if I drew a vertical line, that's not going to cut my parabola in half. But if I draw a horizontal line, that's going to cut my parabola in half. And remember that horizontal lines have a y equals equation. The axis of symmetry always passes through the vertex, so that's why we'll now have y equals k. And then to determine the y-intercepts, you can set x equal to 0 and solve for y. So once again, I just want to remind you to be careful when determining the y-coordinate of the vertex. So since vertex form involves y minus k squared, we have to switch the sign when determining the y-coordinate of the vertex. So for example, the vertex of x equals y minus 3 squared plus 4 is going to be at 4, 3, because h is the term on the outside, and that 3 has a minus in front of it, so we have to switch that sign when writing the vertex. The vertex of x equals y plus 1 squared minus 5 is going to be -5, -1, because that -5 is on the outside. And then we have to switch the sign that's in front of 1 when writing the value of k. So here's the summary of the key features of a horizontal parabola in vertex form. We can identify the direction of opening, the location of the vertex, and the equation of the axis of symmetry. So once again, it's going to be a good idea to go ahead and practice identifying the values of A, H, and K before you start identifying key features. It just is very helpful in keeping all of this information organized. And then remember, we can always verify our answers using Desmos. So let's now identify the key features of the parabola represented by x equals -2 times y minus 4 squared minus 1. Okay, so A is going to be the value -2. H is going to be -1 and K is going to be 4. So since A is negative, this parabola is going to open left. The vertex is going to be at HK, so the vertex is going to be at -1, 4. The axis of symmetry is going to be y equals and then the value of K, so it's going to be y equals 4. So let's go to Desmos now and see what this horizontal parabola looks like. So I'm going to type in the equation. It's now x equals, so make sure you're careful with that, -2 times y minus 4 squared, and then we have minus 1. Okay, so here you can see my horizontal parabola. It does open left, like we said. If I click on this, it tells me the vertex is at -1, 4. And then if I draw in the line y equals 4, you can see the axis of symmetry, right? So if I fold this parabola along this line, both sides will match up. So now let's identify the key characteristics of this parabola. So here, my A is going to be 1/3, H is going to be 1, K is going to be -2. So the direction of opening is going to be right because my A is positive. The vertex is going to be at HK, so it's going to be 1, -2. My axis of symmetry is going to be y equals the value of K, so in this case, that'll be y equals -2. So let's verify this by going to our graph. So we have x equals 1/3, and then we have y plus 2 squared, and then we have plus 1. Okay, so now let's find our parabola. It's over here. It does open right, like we said. You can see that the vertex is at 1, -2. And if I draw in the line y equals -2, you can see that it is in fact the axis of symmetry. So now you can go ahead and pause the video and try doing this example on your own. So here you can see that the value of A is 1/4, H is -7, and K is +5. So it's going to open right because A is positive, and the vertex is going to be at HK, which is -7, 5. The axis of symmetry will be Y equals K, so that's going to be Y equals 5. We can verify all of this using Desmos. So once we type in our equation, X equals 1/4 times Y minus 5 squared, and then we have minus 7. Okay, so once we look at the graph, I'm going to zoom out a little. You can see that it does in fact open to the right. If we click on the vertex, it's going to be at -7, 5. And if I draw in the equation y equals 5, you can see that it does pass through my vertex and it does create a line of symmetry for my parabola. So remember that equations of vertical and horizontal parabolas can be written in vertex form. Remember to identify the values of A, H, and K, and then use these values to identify the key features of the parabola.